I don't know about you, but that looked like money.
Hey, what's up, everyone? Happy New Year to you all. I wanted to kick the New Year's off with something a little different, although I'm only 5 videos in, so how much different can I be? Everything is going to be different. Um, like a lot of you, I started out collecting baseball cards when I was young. I was an Orioles fan, still am, and I was a Cal Ripken and Eddie Murray guy. As I got older, I gravitated toward the Griffeys, the Frank Thomases, and those guys. But I also started buying more and more football cards. That's around the time when Pro Set, Score, Fleer, and Upper Deck came in, action packed. Um, Used to rip packs of Score and Pro Set like crazy back then. Was actually affordable for a lot of us. Unlike today's modern stuff, which is pretty much out of reach for everybody, but that's neither here nor there. Um, I was a Marino guy back then for football. I was and am a Dolphins fan, for better or worse. Uh, a lot of worse than better lately. Um, there wasn't an 84 Topps Marino card that I didn't like. I bought a ton of those. They were like, I don't know, 15, 20 bucks raw back then, which probably isn't much different than now. Um, but that was back before I started buying vintage football. I got on my vintage football journey a couple years ago. But even back then, when I was a kid, there was one card that stood out to me as kind of like, the big card. Um, I was never able to buy it. It was super expensive, to be honest, even back then. And I had a paper route. Paper routes, if you had one back then, you know that they did not pay very well. Um, but the card I'm talking about is a 65 Joe Namath. That card, when I was a kid, that was on the Mount Rushmore of all cards. Um, I put that on the same level as the 52 Topps Mantle back then, and I still do. Um, there's a lot of similarities between the two. They're both very scarce. They're both great looking, iconic cards, and their personalities were kind of similar, and they're both played in the big market city in New York City. So, and Joe Namath to me, he was the epitome of cool. Even as a kid, he was a cool dude, still is. Um, Fast forward to 2025, that Joe Namath card is still scarce. It still looks great. It's one of the better looking cards ever, in my opinion. It's also still expensive. Um, but that got me to thinking a little bit. I've been thinking about this for a few weeks. Um, is the 65 Namath the vintage, post-war vintage football version of the 52 Topps Mantle? Um, Not in terms of value, because quite honestly, there isn't a post-war vintage football card that's going to come close to what the 52 Topps Mantle value is. I don't see that happening. Um, but this is more about notoriety, popularity. You know, is it iconic? Do people look at that and be like, "Oh yeah, that's the 65 Namath rookie"? There are other cards that I might be overlooking as having the title of the vintage football uh, 52 Mantle. Some might argue it's the 58 Topps Jim Brown or the 57 Topps Unitas. And there are others as well. Um, my opinion on it's skewed, obviously, because I've always held this card in high regard. Um, Even as a young boy back in the 80s, I thought the Namath was unattainable. Fortunately for me, that changed last year. I was able to finally get one. Um, and we'll look at that later at the end of the video. This topic kind of, I wanted to do a little bit more digging and research on it to see if I was onto something or if I was just, you know, had the rose-colored glasses on. You know, the thing about Namath is nobody would rank him in the top 20 of quarterbacks of all time, probably. You know, that would be kind of foolish because he wasn't a top 20 of all time quarterback. But what he was, you know, he had the personality, the persona, played in New York, and then he took an AFL team that was heavily underdogged with the New York Jets and beat the heavily favored Baltimore Colts in the Super Bowl. Not only did he do that, a few days prior to that, he guaranteed it. So he put his money where his mouth was. AFL beat the NFL in the Super Bowl, and that really sped up the process of both of those leagues joining forces. Namath on his own changed pro football back in 1969. So a lot of his popularity stems from that, not from his greatness on the field. You know, he played hurt quite a bit, had bad knees coming out of college, dealt with that annually, but he did change football forever, winning that Super Bowl. So let's get to it. You're going to see in this video that, you know, I mentioned some other cards that, you know, arguments can be made for those cards, but I'm focusing solely on the 65 Namath in this video. Yeah, hopefully you find the information, you know, interesting, valuable, not too boring. I'm kind of a boring talker. It's the engineer in me, but I love data diving. I hope you enjoy this. At the end of the video, I'll give you a peek at the Namath I bought last year. So yeah, enjoy, and we'll see you later. Before we dive into the Namath versus Mantle discussion, I wanted to talk about 5 other cards that I thought about, you know, having, you know, similar appeal, I guess, to the Namath, but not quite having enough to be put in that stratosphere for me. The first one we're going to start with is the 48 leaf Sammy Baugh. If you know anything about this card, it is a brutal card to find with centering, good registration, clean edges. Getting 2 out of those 3 is a win. Getting all 3 on one card is a miracle, and you will pay handsomely for it if you do find one. The second card I thought of was the 1950 Bowman Otto Graham. Otto Graham got a lot of time in the spotlight when Brady was winning all those Super Bowls, because people realized that before Brady, Otto Graham was kind of the guy who had done something similar. You know, he went to 10 straight championship games, won 7 league championships, but outside of the hobby, he just doesn't seem to have a lot of notoriety, unfortunately. The next 2 are from the 57 Topps football set, and that would be the Johnny Unitas and the Bart Starr. Each of these cards have the same issues that plague vintage football, you know, from the 40s till heck, even today. But centering is a big deal on the Unitas and the Star. Registration's also pretty tough on these. A lot of times you'll see, especially over the image of the faces on these, that there's a lot of snowing on them. Not sure why it always seems to be on the faces, but it seems to be that way. That being said, these cards are great, but they're not exactly hard to get, and they're still relatively affordable. If you get to the mid to high grades, maybe not, but you can still get into a let's say a 3 for under $400 on the Unitas, and the Bart Starring a short print um, costs a little bit more. The last card I'll talk about is the 58 Topps Jim Brown. This one arguably could be more iconic than the Joe Namath. Um, Jim Brown is widely regarded as one of the greatest football players ever, still to this day. Um, the reason I don't put it at the level of the Namath is just the fact that there are a lot of them out there. That being said, there are condition issues with this card. It's very condition sensitive. It's got the dark background, which is prone to snowing. The centering on the 58 Topps Jim Brown is notoriously bad. So finding one centered with good registration and a clear image, that's going to cost you four figures. But you can still get into a Jim Brown card, for under $1,000, even in low grade. A Joe Namath in low grade's going to cost you over $1,000, and that's for a beater. So that's why I put the Namath above the Brown. It's just the scarcity, the additional population of the Jim Browns that are out there. Just it knocks it down just a little bit. Still a great card, no doubt, but not on the level of the Namath, in my opinion. 65 Namath, finally, 12 minutes into this thing. So, kind of a bird's eye view. Both cards are from beloved and highly collected sets. The 52 Topps needs no introduction. The 65 Topps football, if you don't know, it's the tall boy set. So they're much taller and a little wider than your typical standard issue card. This makes them condition sensitive, which I'll talk about next. The 52 Mantle, as you probably all know, a lot of those are off center. I think there's some registration and print spot issues with those as well. I don't know as much about the 52 Mantle because I'll probably never own one, but I'm pretty sure that that's the case. The 65 Namath, centering is a huge problem with these. They have small borders, so even if it's a little off center, you're going to see it. Many of these are diamond cut as well. And then you have print defects. Since there's a solid yellow background on these, print defects show up. They're eye-popping. You kind of can't unsee those. And then, the overall size of these things, the wear and tear that many of these have is pretty substantial. So finding one that doesn't have much wear and tear on the edges and or corners is tough to do, but they're out there. As I mentioned earlier, Mantle and Namath, both icons in the city of New York. Very similar personalities. Mantle's one of the all-time greats. Namath, not so much, but he did change the game of pro football forever. As you'll see next, it's kind of bizarre how similar the pop reports are for both of these cards for PSA and SGC. I was couldn't believe it. Couldn't believe the numbers when I saw those. We're going to dive into that next. And lastly, both of these cards are going to set you back four figures. A cheap Namath, you can get into one that's a beater for, $1,000 or so, maybe a little more. You start getting into the 3s, 4s, 5s, you're pushing $3,000 at that point, if not more. The Mantle obviously dwarfs those prices, but again, you can get one in the four-figure range, I believe. It'll be a beater, but they're out there. So yeah, that being said, let's dive into the pop report data. Interesting population report data for these cards. I was blown away at how close the population of these cards are to each other. We'll start with PSA. As of today, January, what is it, the 2nd? As of today, there are just a hair over 2,052 Topps Mickey Mantles that have been graded with PSA, 2023. The 65 Topps Joe Namath, there's only a few more of those. There's 2,119. Again, less than 100 different. And if we go down to SGC, you'll see that the numbers are very close too. The 52 Topps Mantle, there's 673 of those graded with SGC. And the Namath, there are 764. So again, a little under 100 difference. I'm kind of speechless as to how similar that data is, and it kind of backs up my opinion that this card, the 65 Topps Namath, is the post-war vintage football card that best resembles the 52 Mantle. I don't think resembles is the word, but I think you kind of get my point that if there's one card that could be as iconic, and I stress the word could be as iconic as the 52 Mantle in the vintage football space, it's the 65 Joe Namath. It's crazy to me that there's less. Well, I guess there's let me see, yeah, less than 100 in each one for PSA and SGC. So yeah, there's the data on that. One little other tidbit you'll see over to the right. The 65 Namath has a quote-unquote butterfly variation that's out there. It does carry a little bit of a premium, nothing significant. The one I bought, I didn't go out of my way to get one or the other. I just wanted one. Mine does not have the butterfly. Cool if you get it. To me, it's just some sort of a printing blotch or something. That's what it looks like. But it's out there. There is a little bit of a premium for it. And yeah, you'll see that SGC actually at one point distinguished between the two, although they only graded a total of 3. But yeah, the grading companies don't make a distinction. So not sure you should either, but it's out there if you want it. It's hard to quantify how many of each, or how many, or I should say what percentage of these cards have the butterfly variation, since they don't distinguish between them. So anyway, there's the data for that, and now I'll show you my 65 Topps Namath. So here's my 65 Namath rookie that I got just a few weeks ago. Been hunting for one for a while. I found one that made sense to me at a price that made sense to me. It does not have the centering that I typically look for in cards, but there are also no creases in this thing, and the corners are razor sharp. So off center, side to side, but it's not diamond cut. If I'm going to get a card that's off center, A, the corners had better cut butter, and B, there really can't be diamond cut unless it's, a really rare card. Well, this one is, I wouldn't consider this rare at all, but it's, you can be picky, especially when you're spending 4 figures on a piece of cardboard. This thing is just gorgeous. No creases. There's a couple little spots of paper loss right there. You can barely see those. But there's a 1, 2, 2 little spots there. And as you can see, no butterfly. No butterfly on the hand. Okay, cool. That's my Namath. Thanks for watching. Hopefully this, was somewhat interesting to you. If not, I apologize. Feel free to hit the like button. Subscribe if you wish. There'll be more vintage football on the way. Thanks again.